Hey yo! I'm Miss Linnea Lark, and I've been an art teacher for 17 years. And today we're going to learn how to design and carve a symmetrical image onto a clay tile. Here we go. Let's start with a little overview of this mini-series. In this first video, we're going to learn a bit about carving and why it's such an important sculptural skill. And then I'll walk you through the creative process where you'll organize, research, and imagine possibilities for your own carved tile. In part 2, I'll walk you through making a life-size draft of your symmetrical tile design and how to use the slab roller to make your tile, and finally, how to transfer your design onto your clay tile. In part 3, it's all about how to carve and the tools that you'll need to do it. I'll teach you how to carve your basic shapes so that you can easily see each shape, and your tile will shift from a flat drawing on clay to a three-dimensional sculpture with multiple planes. In part 4, I'll show you how to carve natural textures and patterns onto 3 of your shapes. We'll finish carving and learn some helpful cleanup tricks. And lastly, in part 5, I will show you how to use an underglaze wash to accentuate your 3D carvings, and then how to experiment with colored glazes to create a colorful finished carved tile. So let's get into it and talk about carving and what it actually is. Carving is the act of using tools to shape something from a material by scraping away portions of that material. Carving is a subtractive process. In our last lesson, the animal pinch pots, we added details on by slipping and scoring them. That was an additive process. Carving is another powerful way to add details to your work, but instead of adding them on with slipping and scoring, we will be carving them away. Carving is an essential skill for sculptors to master and is a great way to add details such as texture to your work. Carving is also a great way to make your work more 3D and less flat. In this project, we will work on 2 different ways to carve. First, we'll be learning how to carve big basic shapes, and secondly, we'll be learning how to carve details like textures. But soon, once we grow your carving skills, we will be making more complex sculptures where you'll need to use both additive and subtractive methods in order to get a level of complexity and detail that you desire. Let's check out and get inspired by some amazing sculptors. There are 2 main types of carving, low relief and high relief. Low relief is shallow carving where you aren't digging very deep into the clay, and as a result, the image is only slightly raised from the background. Low relief is also called bas relief carving. The second type of carving is called high relief. In high relief carving, you will dig much deeper. The rule of thumb is that you have to go at least halfway through your surface. High relief carvings tend to look more 3D and are raised up higher from the background. In this tile carving project, we will be carving in high relief, which is also called an alto relievo carving. Alright, let's get into the project. You're going to create a 6 by 6 inch symmetrical tile design using 5 or more geometric or organic shapes. 3 of those shapes must be overlapping, creating 3 separate planes. And you're going to carve them all in high relief. You'll then carve 3 different textures onto 3 of those shapes. Are you excited? I am. For this project, you won't be using images of things like people, animals, or objects. You will be limited to basic geometric and organic shapes like circles, squares, and blobs. Organic shapes are flowy and uneven like shapes found in nature. Geometric shapes are precise, even, and measured. Geometric shapes are used in math principles and have precise names like circle, oval, square, rectangle, and triangle. All those shapes that we've learned since childhood. While organic shapes are random and have no names. Your design must have a minimum of 5 shapes, and 3 of those shapes must be overlapping each other. The goal is to have 3 different planes in your design. Let me show you what I mean. In this first example, there are 3 shapes side by side. None of them are overlapping each other, and so they're all on the same plane. That's not going to work for us. In this second example, 1 shape is being overlapped by the other 2 shapes. So yes, there's overlapping, but there's only 2 planes. There's 2 in the front and 1 in the back. That is a total of 2 planes. In this third example, there are actually 3 planes. We have 1 shape in the front, we have 1 shape in the back, and there is 1 shape in the middle. All 3 of these shapes are overlapping each other in 1 area. We have 3 planes. It is our goal to have 3 shapes overlapping each other in at least 1 area of your design. This will help you carve different planes and learn how to carve order. As I said before, all your shapes will need to be arranged in a symmetrical design. A symmetrical design is cut in half at an axis, and then each side is perfectly balanced with a mirror image. Your tile's axis could be divided vertically, horizontally, or even diagonally. Once I have my axis in the middle, I place a shape on one side and then place a flipped identical shape on the opposite side like a mirror image. If I place a shape here, then I place an identical flip shape on the opposite side. I do this again and again until I have a minimum of 5 shapes and 3 of those shapes are overlapping, giving us 3 clear planes. Which type of symmetrical design are you drawn to the most? Does it have a vertical axis, a horizontal axis, or a diagonal axis? The last requirement for these carved tiles is that you will need to carve a minimum of 3 different natural textures onto at least 3 of your shapes. Texture is a way something looks or feels. For the 3D tiles, it's all about surface quality of your tile. There are all kinds of amazing natural and man-made textures out there. Natural textures are things like scales, rippling water, wood grain, fur, or dripping honey. Man-made textures could include a basket weave, a chain link fence, a brick wall, or gears. I'm thinking of a snake skin and blown glass. One is natural and the other is man-made, but imagine touching both and how differently they would look and feel. What are some natural textures that you think would be fun to carve? If you're in a class, feel free to pause this video and share out. What are some man-made textures that you can think of? Great! I'm sure you all thought of some rough, silky, jagged, smooth, fuzzy, wrinkly, lumpy, bumpy, hard, soft, sticky, slippery, and crunchy textures that you could carve onto your tiles. For my tile, I use coral, feathers, and worms as inspiration for my carved surfaces. Try not to be too literal when choosing which shapes to combine with a texture. It doesn't have to make sense. If you want to use a texture of a beehive, it doesn't have to be on a shape that is a beehive shape. Try to think more abstractly than literally. Remember, we aren't drawing specific things like beehives, cats, or mountains. I can carve a beehive texture onto any shape that looks nothing like a beehive. So let's recap the assignment. You're going to create a 6 by 6 inch symmetrical tile design using 5 or more geometric or organic shapes. 3 of those shapes must be overlapping, creating 3 separate planes. And you're going to carve them all in high relief. You'll then carve 3 different textures onto 3 of those shapes. Are you excited? I am. All right, now it's time to brainstorm. And lucky for you, I have made you all a brainstorming worksheet that will help you design your tiles. You can purchase it at my Teachers Pay Teachers page. It's only a few dollars, and all the proceeds will go straight to me. But don't worry, it'll help me afford a better apartment that might have a dishwasher one day. That way, I can use more of my time making videos for you and less of my time hand washing dishes. Check out the link in the description below. Pretty please, please buy the worksheet. All right, let's check out this invaluable brainstorming worksheet. I've designed it to work through the neurological stages that your mind uses during the creative process. Fancy, right? I mean, it's worth a few dollars. It will guide you through every process necessary to go from an idea to a finished glazed tile. When starting the brainstorming ideas, it's good to remember that brainstorming and thinking is a messy and imperfect process. It's all about exploring possibilities until you find an idea that you love. You should be brainstorming the good, the bad, and the mediocre ideas. There are no right or wrong answers, but try to think past your first ideas and expand upon it. Okay, here we go. Step 1, you're going to brainstorm your ideas for your tile's symmetrical shape design. First, you'll need to choose an axis point where you'll divide your tile vertically, horizontally, or diagonally in half. I've included an example of each to help you choose. Circle the one that you're going to go for. Then you'll need to draw a minimum of 6 geometric shapes and 6 organic shapes. Remember that geometric shapes are the shapes that have names, and organic shapes are random and can look any way that your imagination can dream up. If you're still struggling to draw 3 planes, don't worry. Some of your teenage brains literally haven't finished developing all of your spatial awareness yet. So here's a tip. Draw a shape, then draw a second shape that is behind the first shape. They have to be overlapping for them to be on separate planes. I can see that they are overlapping on the outside here and here. You're going to choose one of those two locations to draw a third shape behind both of these two shapes. The last shape should be behind or overlapping both of the other two shapes. And now you have 3 clear planes in one area. This area is the area where it touches 3 different shapes that are all overlapping each other. Let's try this together. Now list 6 textures that you think could be cool to carve. Once this section of your brainstorm is filled out, use a highlighter to circle the shapes that you want to use and circle 3 textures that you will include in your design. Now we are on to step 2, the references. Reference photos are all about researching images, carving techniques, and designs that will help you make your tile the most dynamic. Start by looking up symmetrical shape designs. You can look up quilt designs, architecture references, and other types of symmetrical designs. You'll need a minimum of 3 symmetrical design images. Take your pick. You'll also need 3 reference images for your textures. You'll need 1 great image that will help you carve each of your 3 textures. Look for things like plants, animals, rocks, and more. Google natural textures and man-made textures if you're not sure what to choose. Make sure the reference photos that you choose are close enough to the texture that they will be most beneficial when helping you carve. If you find a cool texture that you didn't plan on using, that's totally fine. Just figure out which texture you're going to replace it with because you only need 3. At this point in the creative process, you can still change your mind. Just make sure that you save 3 images for 3 separate textures. And lastly, you're going to need to research 3 examples of high relief carvings. This will help you examine other people's work and learn from observation how to make shapes look 3D. So important. For my students, you will need to research and save all 9 of your mandatory images in a Google Doc. You'll print them out so that I can easily grade them and so that you can have them handy to use while you're carving with dirty hands. On to the last stage of your brainstorming worksheet, number 3, your thumbnails. But before we start designing, a warning and a few tips. Thin slabs of clay tend to crack in the kiln. Let me explain why. Have you ever been in the car in the summertime and you look down the road and at the end the road looks like it's waving, like it's actually moving? That's because of the intense heat of the summer. Heat tends to move in waves. Same thing happens when you put your thin little tile into the kiln and it reaches temperatures of 1500 degrees. So as your tile is in the kiln, it's flexing and bending and moving in that heat. So tip number 1 is to keep thick areas of clay around the outside of your tile. Thick clay is more stable and less likely to crack in the heat waves of the kiln. You can achieve thick edges by including a border around your design or by using large shapes that touch the edges of your tile. Either way will work. Tip number 2 is to have less background space than the area for your shapes. The background will be the skinniest area, so less skinny areas will make it so that your tile is less likely to crack. And tip number 3, smaller shapes are actually much harder and more time consuming to carve. The more shapes you have, the more advanced your design will be. Beginners tend to accidentally carve too much because they're getting used to how the tools work and how hard to press depending on how soft or hard the clay is. Beginners tend to accidentally over-carve, which can make your shapes smaller and smaller and smaller than intended. Small shapes can be very problematic, frustrating, and difficult for the beginner. Consider your skill level and time management skills before you bite off a design that is more than you can chew or carve. Either way. All right, let's get back to drawing some thumbnails. Thumbnails are a rough practice drawing that help you compose your design. You'll draw a minimum of 3 wildly different designs. Try using different axes, different shapes, and altering the size and placement of your shapes. While you're designing, it is important to remember that you must have at least 5 different shapes total, and that 3 of those shapes must be overlapping in one area, creating 3 separate planes in your design. Remember the tips that I gave you earlier. Start with one shape, draw a second shape behind the first shape, find the area where those two shapes overlap, and then draw a third shape behind both of those two shapes. Now, you're going to draw a minimum of 3 thumbnails. Make sure that each thumbnail is slightly better than the last. It's common for people when they're doing thumbnails to fall in love with their first design, and then they just kind of slub off the second 2 thumbnails. But this is a characteristic of lazy baby creativity. Make sure you think and explore and play, have fun, and really try your hardest to make each new thumbnail a little bit better than the last. I mean, imagine what you could create if you didn't stop trying after your first attempt. Push yourself to be better. All right, my baby birds, you have your brainstorming worksheet and you know what your homework is. You're going to brainstorm your idea, research your ideas, and then plan out by drawing and imagining those ideas. Make sure that you have this worksheet completed, every space is filled out, and you have 9 references printed ready to be turned in when you walk through my classroom door the next time I see you. In the next video, I'll show you how to create a perfectly symmetrical draft for your tile, how to actually make the clay tile using a slab roller, and then how to transfer your design onto your fresh wet clay. If you'd like to follow along or learn other cool artsy stuff, make sure you like and subscribe and maybe ring that bell to get notifications. If you'd like to purchase this easy and helpful, invaluable worksheet, check out the link in the description below. Also, I'd like to thank all the amazing Instagram artists that have given their permission for me to include their inspiring artwork in these videos for my students. It seriously means so much to me. Thank you guys for watching and happy day!